Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. No, I don't think I live up to those assumptions. I thought I was asked to talk about the cultural distance that people perceive there is to the Arab and Muslim world, which might also throw some light on this alleged cultural proximity that Ole Weber was taking up as maybe a more problematic issue than the first speakers this morning. What could Nordics hope to achieve by cultural dialogue in the Arab-Muslim world? It's probably not so much like what we initially talked about, the Soviet Union, people to people, that we could somehow reassure each other that we share a lot beneath politics. It's almost the opposite. We don't have a Soviet Union in the Arab world. We have small, pretty weak states who have generally only ambitions in their neighborhood, not at all reaching the Nordic or the Baltic region, and they're not strong. Our concerns are actually at the level of society, at the level of certain organizations, and at the individual levels. There's, in this country, and I think generally in the Nordic country, there's a certain popular sort of acrimonious attitude to the issue of immigration, which is not going to go away. Rather, I think we'll see a lot of it in the coming year. Both the settled immigrants and the future immigrants are issues of culture as they are understood. So trust building is certainly needed, but culture seems to be divisive, not unifying, when we discuss the issue of Arab-Muslim culture and cultural dialogue. Culture does not seem to be the glue that holds us together. Rather, people see culture as something sticky glue that they have brought with them and don't really wash away when they come up to our shores. So there is actually a lot of discussion about dialogue with the Arab world. The UN has set up a very big program of inter-civilizational dialogue, meaning really Muslim civilization and European Western civilization. The same goes for a lot of the discussions about inter-religious dialogue. It's mainly considered a Muslim, non-Muslim dialogue in many respects. So it's high politics. It's states which are promoting the inter-civilizational dialogue very much. A state like Iran, a state like Saudi Arabia, love those words as because they want to define their own civilization against so many other people who might have other ideas. And who speaks for the Arabs? When we say dialogue with the Arab world, who is that world? It's not so easy, and it's often quite political. There's the issue of language. We would like to speak to people who speak English, don't we? And that would be a certain proportion of those people. Only some years ago, I learned that the word I've been using for many, many years, lingua franca, was actually a real spoken language once in the Mediterranean. It was a language spoken by fishermen and pirates and sailors when they went to ports in different parts of the Mediterranean. So there was some French, there was a smattering of Spanish and Italian, but there was also many Arab words because that was the southern shores of the Mediterranean. It was a true language. And when colonialism started in the region, namely with France's invasion in Algeria in 1830, they had booklets, parleurs in lingua franca, so officers would be able to communicate with some of the people they met. But France conquered Algeria and very soon decided that Algeria should speak French, indeed should become a department of France. And Algerians learned French for 130 years. They still do. It's still an issue that many people in Algeria don't speak Arabic well, and especially in the 60s and 70s, the program of ta'arib, of Arabization, was very high on the agenda in Algeria. But even so, many bourgeois Algerians are very proud that they speak French. I'm telling you this story because cultural dialogue is always held in a language, and a language is not just any language. It's a language of power and sometimes a language of asymmetry. And that is very much the case when you speak about the Arab and Muslim world. And it may also be a power of class. And when it's colonialism, you might think that colonialism ended a long time ago. The 1970s was the last part of the Arab world that became completely independent. But strong forces are keeping the memory of colonialism alive, just like strong forces are keeping the memory of our 5 years of German occupation alive. Lots of films, school books, and everything. It's a defining moment for many Arab states. That's when we became independent. Consider the United States, how important it is to them when they became independent, and you'll see why it must be important to Algerians or Tunisians or Egyptians or others. So people grow up learning about those evil colonialists. They watch films where the French soldiers are incredibly stupid and don't see the smart freedom fighters, running around, just like we have films about the Germans, patrols, and so on. So colonialism is kept alive and means something. It means that there's a very complex relationship between Arabs and Europe. Not just the parts of Europe which were actively engaged in colonialism in the Arab world, but any part of Europe. And it is not just negative, it's also positive. People have taken in a lot of European culture. When Arabs come here, they want to see Elsinore because they believe it's Shakespeare's Hamlet. And when they learn that in one of the monasteries up there, Bach's teacher, Buxtehude, was playing, this means something. It has nothing to do with Denmark. It's all concocted by Shakespeare, but this is world culture. This is cultural capital, that they would like to say that they have been here and there and so on. They're not particularly interested in the Danes who live there or the Danish history because Denmark is just too marginal to them. That's a sad fact, that the Nordics are interesting because mainly they're part of Europe, and sometimes that's good and sometimes it's bad. Some leftist intellectuals will tell us, but you're the good ones, you didn't have colonies with us. Actually, Denmark had colonies elsewhere, but they don't know about that. So it's played up, this guilt complex. Also in the United Nations, certain Arab countries are very astute at playing the anti-colonial card, even again. Or if you hear Hezbollah and its leader, they would very often speak about the Western arrogance and so on. So it's something that can also be played against us, playing on some sort of colonial guilt, which I think few of us have, but maybe some of us have. Some claim we have it, maybe those are the ones who really have it, I don't know. But it does point to the fact that many people in the Baltics, in the Nordics, no matter whether we had colonies or not, we read Jules Verne, we read Tintin, and so on. We had this mental map of the world where Indians were burning widows, Chinese were... We had this idea that it was barbarian, it was backwards, we had to save it. And if that's the attitude you come with in cultural dialogue, you are lost, of course. And you can hear it. Maybe we heard just a whiff of it this morning, a kind of paternalism that we are in the good society, we have succeeded, now you can do like us. That's never going to be very helpful if you want to engage in cultural dialogue. You need to appreciate those you speak to rather more. And appreciating Arab and Muslim culture does not mean buying the Quran and making some quotes. They will feel it's very inappropriate, whether they are believing Muslims or not. Generally, the idea that they are Bedouins or they are Muslims doesn't go down that terribly well. It's just like those who consider us Vikings and nothing but Vikings. Maybe it's fun, maybe we can be proud of it, maybe we can make jokes about it, but it's not terribly relevant to our societies and our culture today. We want, and they want, to be appreciated for what they stand for, not what once happened in history. So we must know something about their cinema, their music, their literature, their way of life, their food, and so on, and not just talk about it as something which was great once, which can be, in a way, quite insulting if you come to think of it. But cinema and literature in the Arab world is a very bourgeois thing. Lots of people don't really take much interest, especially in literature. Cinema, maybe, television, certainly. So you really need to know what's going on, and not a lot of us can spend time doing that. But I believe it's worthwhile that some of us do. What do Arabs and Muslims know about Nordic culture? Do they appreciate something? Well, I think we have done some good translating, for instance, of children's books. We would be known for certain good things, but mainly intellectuals and others know the Nordic country because of the welfare state, a fairly idealistic welfare state, and of course sometimes actual policies. It's a bit like their view of Chinese and Japan. They are not particularly interested in the individual Chinese or Japanese, but they might be interested in the system. Where, say, France or Italy, they're interested in the individuals a bit more. I think we have to work on that. So they know us through English and French culture, and if something is big in the United States, they will come here and ask for it. Just like we do with their novels and so on. Someone has to discover it, and our publishers will only take it in if it has succeeded in France or the United States or something. I think we need to do better. But let me end by raising quite a different issue, namely cultural crisis. Culture is not just about feel good and feel that we are alike. Sometimes we feel we are pretty much afar, not in our state policies, but in our culture. I was head of the Danish Institute in Cairo when the cartoon crisis broke out. And this was one of the major crises in Danish foreign policy. Really, Denmark felt very isolated. Also sometimes from our Nordic friends who thought that this was just Denmark being once again very unsavory and rude. And certainly there was a part of it. But after all, the newspaper did nothing against Danish law. It published some cartoons about something just like it would do about so many other things. It hadn't really occurred to it that the internet would bring this all over the world in an instant. So what was once a very local thing became a global thing without anybody thinking about it. And we had to explain, but certain things could hardly be explained because we do differ. Culture makes people differ, and that is part of the identity policies of culture. So we'll need to take some hard discussions sometimes. But in doing so, we are actually creating culture, and maybe very worthwhile global culture, because we all need to find out just how we do that in a world which is so much more interconnected than it ever was. And first of all, we have our own citizens who are Arabs and Muslims. Some of them are actually very useful. We haven't been particularly good at it, but they are very useful in public diplomacy because they are proud of being Danish. They share our values to a very considerable degree, and they are very convincing when they speak to people from those regions. So culture one last point is that this crisis was also very divisive inside Danish society, just as it was actually very divisive in a number of Arab Muslim countries. And this is what culture also does. Let me end by a quote from Al-Ghazali, one of the most famous Muslim theologians who had this sort of, was so considerate to the Western scholar as to die in the year of 1111. And he gave this advice: if you want to engage in dialogue, just concentrate for a moment and say to yourself, I lost something. It's all about finding that thing again. So you want people to get engaged in the search. It will help you find it. And when they come up and show you something and it's totally wrong, you won't say, oh, how stupid you are. You'd say, it looks a bit like it, so keep on going, because you really want them to search. And when someone finds it, you're just very happy. That's how you should do cultural dialogue. Thank you.